Canada's military is in trouble. 1 in 10 positions remains unfilled, and nearly half the military's equipment is too broken or outdated to deploy after decades of underfunding and political drift. If a major conflict broke out today, Canada would struggle to respond. But now, something big is happening. Ottawa is launching one of the most ambitious military upgrades in modern Canadian history, pouring billions into submarines, fighter jets, long-range missiles, and surveillance systems. It's being sold as the military's long-overdue comeback, a bid to restore strength and resilience after years on the back foot. But this isn't just about new kit, it's about choosing a new direction. As this military overhaul gains momentum, Canada is also weighing a closer alignment with Europe on defense, hoping to ease its reliance on the US. That effort is quickly becoming real. Canada is now in advanced talks to join the EU's new Defence Industrial Initiative, an unprecedented step that would open European markets to Canadian firms and bring weapons production to Canadian soil. It's being framed as a win-win. New markets, less dependence on Washington, and a hedge against US volatility. But it also marks the most serious move yet to formalize a shift away from America's defense ecosystem. At the same time, Donald Trump's return to the White House is forcing Ottawa to confront a deeper question. Just how closely should Canada remain tied to the United States? Prime Minister Mark Carney says the old relationship, built on trust and tight military integration, is over. For the first time in decades, Canada is seriously asking how far it should diverge from the US, and what that would mean for its security, its sovereignty, and its future place in the world. Because the real dilemma behind this historic defense overhaul isn't just what Canada buys, it's who it plans to stand with. And to understand what's at stake, we need to start with a health check of the Canadian Armed Forces. To put it simply, and to quote a former defense minister, Canada's military is in a death spiral. It's struggling to meet even its most basic readiness goals, all while defense spending sits at just 1.37% of GDP, among the lowest in NATO. Across all 3 branches of the Canadian Armed Forces, the numbers paint the same bleak picture. Just 51% of Canada's maritime fleets are deemed serviceable. Land fleets in the Army fare only slightly better at 56%, and the Air Force ranks lowest, with under 44% of aerospace fleets meeting operational and readiness standards. To compound these problems, Canada's forces are stuck with yesterday's equipment and not enough of it to matter. Canada is currently guarding the world's longest coastline with just 4 submarines. The aging Victoria-class boats were built in the 1980s for the Royal Navy, retired by 1995 and sold to Canada in 1998. After years of refits, they finally entered service in the early 2000s, and they're still in the water today. The fighter jet fleet faces similar problems. Its aging cohort of CF-18s date from the 1980s, with some of the older airframes now entering 45 years of service. Delays in acquiring a new generation of fighters forced the government to obtain 25 aging Australian FA-18A and B variants to plug the holes in the country's air defences. Yet, when Canada does invest in new military kit, the average acquisition life cycle for this new equipment is 16 years, a 66% increase from 2004. In some circumstances, this means some military upgrades are verging on obsolete by the time they're actually deployed. And behind those numbers is a deeper, more human problem, a military that's hollowing out. Canada is short more than 16,000 military personnel, roughly 15% of its authorized strength. Recruitment has collapsed and retention is worse. The people who do sign up aren't sticking around. The military is losing its newest recruits at nearly double the rate of the broader force, mostly because they're left waiting, Some spend over 200 days in limbo before receiving training, especially in technical roles. The result is frustration, underemployment, and a steady bleed of fresh talent before they've even had a chance to get started. This is the backdrop to Canada's massive military modernization plan. A plan that promises hundreds of billions in spending over the next 2 decades to deal with a more uncertain world. Today, Canada isn't just facing a military readiness crisis, it's facing a radically different geopolitical environment. In the Arctic, that shift is already underway. Climate change is opening up new shipping lanes, new economic frontiers, and with them, new vulnerabilities. Canada's far north is becoming more accessible, not just to commercial activity but to foreign surveillance, military platforms, and great power competition. Russia has been rebuilding and modernizing its Cold War-era bases in its Arctic territory, and its new hypersonic missiles, many capable of carrying nuclear payloads, now pose a serious threat to North America through Arctic airspace. As a result, Canadian officials now see the Arctic as a key route for potential threats, one where both traditional and emerging weapon systems could reach Canadian and US territory with very little warning. At the same time, China's ambitions are growing. Once welcomed as an Arctic stakeholder, Beijing is now seen as a strategic wildcard. In just the last year, Canadian officials tracked multiple incursions by Chinese surveillance platforms, including the infamous high-altitude balloon that violated Canadian airspace. Dual-use Chinese research vessels, capable of both scientific study and military reconnaissance, have been appearing more frequently in northern waters. And yet, as those threats evolve, so too does Canada's most important security relationship. Because what used to be a predictable partnership with the United States is now anything but. The return of Donald Trump to the White House has sent shockwaves through Ottawa. The president has openly floated the complete annexation of Canada. He's imposed tariffs, insulted Canadian leadership, and questioned whether the United States should even defend Canada at all. Prime Minister Mark Carney has declared the old defense relationship with Washington over. His government wants to lower its reliance on American defense giants and build new partnerships with Europe and Asia. But can Canada afford to distance itself from the United States when nearly every threat it faces is getting closer? Since 2017, Canada has been working to modernize its military under the strong, secure, engaged policy, with more than $200 billion committed to new equipment, Arctic operations, and international partnerships. In 2022, Ottawa pledged $38.6 billion to upgrade NORAD, its joint continental defense system with the United States. And in 2024, the Our North Strong and Free policy allocated $73 billion to bolster Arctic defenses and meet NATO commitments, aiming to raise defense spending to 1.76% of GDP by 2029. It's a surge in spending that reflects both the deepening threats and the deepening debate over how tightly Canada should remain tied to the American security umbrella. So where is this money going? And what does it say about Canada's future military posture and its ties to the US? So far, the answer is clear. Canada is diversifying its suppliers more than ever before, in a clear signal to the Trump White House. But it is still very far from splitting from the US defense ecosystem. So let's look at the numbers. Some of the country's biggest ticket items, the ones with the highest strategic value, all trace back to American defense firms. Canada has committed to 88 F-35 fighter jets from Lockheed Martin, 16 P-8A Poseidons from Boeing, 11 MQ-9B Sky Guardian drones from General Atomics, and HIMARS rocket systems through a $5 billion US military sale. These deals represent massive strategic commitments to platforms that are designed for full integration into US-led operations. This is partly because the US sets the pace of military technology, defines the standard for secure command and control systems, and fields the largest fleets, making parts, upgrades, and global integration easier and cheaper. In that light, buying American is a practical choice. But something's changing. Canada has started sending signals that it wants options. It's purchasing over-the-horizon radar from Australia's Dawn system, marking one of its biggest non-American defense buys in recent history, and a clear signal of political intent. Ottawa chose Dawn not just for its capabilities, but because it's not made in the United States. It's also launched one of the most ambitious submarine replacement programs in the country's history. Under the Canadian Patrol Submarine Project, Ottawa plans to acquire up to 12 conventionally powered under-ice capable submarines. And it's not just shopping in the West. South Korea has pitched a multi-billion-dollar deal involving its advanced KSS-3 boats, along with armored vehicles and support infrastructure. Other contenders include Germany and Sweden, although a final decision won't come until 2028. But Canada isn't just looking to diversify its equipment, it's exploring a whole new defense marketplace. Ottawa is now in talks with the European Union to join a joint procurement and production framework that would reduce reliance on the United States. Under this plan, Canada would co-develop or procure major platforms, like fighter jets, with European partners and even build them at home. Carney's government has made it clear, defense cooperation with Europe is strategic in nature. It's about lowering US leverage, protecting Canadian industry, and gaining more control over what gets bought, how it's used, and where it's built. Meanwhile, construction is finally beginning on Canada's new generation of warships. 15 vessels based on a British hull, built in Halifax and equipped with an American combat system. It's the largest Canadian shipbuilding project since World War II. And then there's the fight brewing over Canada's future airborne early warning fleet. In some quarters, there is a strong preference for the US-made Boeing E-7 Wedgetail, but consideration is also being given to non-US alternatives. The final decision could potentially become a litmus test for how serious Ottawa really is about strategic autonomy. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Carney has also ordered a review of the F-35 program, even after the first aircraft were funded. His government is now openly exploring European alternatives and even local production, citing Trump's erratic behavior and rising trade tensions. So what's emerging is a hybrid strategy. Canada is still buying big from American firms, but it's hedging, balancing, and testing alternatives in a way that it has never done before, despite possessing relatively diversified legacy equipment. To sum it up, Canada is diversifying its defense acquisitions, but it's not yet disentangling from the US. And for now, that may be the only viable middle ground. But looming over that middle ground is one big wildcard, the Golden Dome. Unveiled by President Trump as a next-generation missile shield to defend the US from hypersonic and intercontinental attacks, the Golden Dome is part showmanship, part strategic reset. But what's already clear is this: the US can't build it alone, and it can't build it without Canada. The Arctic is key to detecting missiles launched from Russia or China. Canadian territory and radar infrastructure are essential for the early warning and interception systems the Golden Dome would rely on. Which means Canada uniquely isn't just a prospective buyer, it's a necessary partner. This is not lost on Ottawa. For the first time in 17 years, Canada and the US Missile Defense Agency have been quietly exploring options for Canadian involvement in continental missile defense. That low-key dialogue, which began last year, has now gone public. Prime Minister Mark Carney confirmed high-level discussions are underway, though he stopped short of any commitment. And that's where Canada's leverage lies. This isn't just about whether to buy in. It's about whether to help shape what could become the most expensive and consequential US defense project in decades. Canada brings more than cash to the table. It brings land, radar coverage, Arctic access, and hard-won public trust in binational defense. If Ottawa chooses to play hardball, it can. Because what the Golden Dome project really asks is, will Canada deepen its strategic alignment with the United States that is becoming harder to trust? Or will it hedge, diversifying partnerships, protecting autonomy, and keeping options open? Either way, this is not a return to the old model of allied cooperation. Canada is no longer operating in a world where trust in the US is the foundation of its defense policy. That era is probably over. Instead, Canada is steering toward a new kind of equilibrium. One where its relationship with Washington is less stable, less generous, and far more transactional. That demands a stronger, more self-reliant military, a deliberate shift away from dependence on US platforms, and a clear-eyed strategy to ensure Canada can stand its ground, no matter who sits in the Oval Office.